So, in your mind, back up for a few moments to March. The month of March. Never a good month in the Midwest because the weather can be a real stinker, but the good old month of March. March Madness about to start, the end of April. We were excited for the spring. And then the first thing that happened to change my schedule anyway was the cancellation of my alumni basketball tournament back in Saranac. I was in charge of that for like 15 years. My friend Russ was going to be in charge of it this year. It was going to be making my plans to go back. And then they canceled it because the school was going to close. And then Nicole had to cancel her Fairy and Janet evening for the same kind of reason. And then one thing after another. In-person worship was suspended. Schools were closed. Our Easter, Good Friday, Holy Week stuff was all scrapped. And life got really different real quick for a lot of people. And then, of course, in the height of that, we learned about murder hornets. And thankfully, that one was a false alarm for the most part, unless you live in that little spot of the Pacific Northwest where they found some, because I don't know how people would have handled murder hornets this year. It would have been pretty bad. And then, as we got towards the end of May, the conversation changed towards reopening and starting things up again and what businesses could open. And I know obviously a lot of people were upset one way or another. It was too fast, it was too slow, it was too this, it was too that. That's obviously normal in our country. But when reopening was the focal point, May 25th happened, and George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. And we realized that this year just was going to keep going on like this. And so there have been a proliferation of memes on social media about what next will happen. You've seen perhaps some about June being the month for the supervolcano in Yellowstone National Park. And I like this one with Kermit the Frog. Sounds like thunder outside, but the way 2020 is going, it could be Godzilla. You get plans. As much as we make them, and as often as we have them in life, they are subject to change because the future is not known. Which actually fits quite well, I think, with what the Apostle Paul is saying here at the end of 1 Corinthians 16. Our next to last message out of 1 Corinthians, and then we'll have finished the entire book. Let's look at verse 1 to start. It says, "Now about the collection for the Lord's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do." In a normal year, I might have focused on just these first couple verses about collections. Might have talked about how we support the church and how we support charities. I might have put the focus on that. But 2020 has changed that perspective a little bit, and I broadened it out and looked at the next couple verses after this, because this is all about Paul talking about his plans, what I'm doing now, what I'm going to do soon. And so I think there's some wisdom for us from Paul's discussion of his plans. And his first thing is to tell the church at Corinth, when you make plans, one of the things worth considering is, what are other churches doing? What are they doing when we're making church plans at other churches? Because we can learn from what other churches are doing well, and we can learn from what other churches are doing not so well. Because we can learn from them. Paul had previous experience with this Judea famine relief collection. That's what he's talking about. There was a very nasty famine in Judea. He was collecting funds to buy grain for the Christians in Judea so that they did not starve to death. He had been working on this for some time, and he had success with the churches in Galatia. He had told them to do it this way. It had worked well for them, and so now he says, hey guys in Corinth, use the knowledge that I have gained by working with these other churches, and you guys do the same thing. It worked there, it can work here. And that should remind us of some truths that we never should really forget. Number one, in case you were not aware of this, we are not the first generation of Christians. We can learn from the past. By the way, I'm teaching a class on church history on Tuesday. We can learn from the past. from what Christians have done right and what Christians have done wrong in generations past. And there are a lot of examples of both. The generations that have gone before us have done some amazing things, and they've done some not so good things, just like our generation. We can learn from the past. Secondly, you may not be aware of this, but it's true. We are not the only denomination of Christians. Believe it or not, there are other kinds of Protestants out there. And I think you know that because of where we live and how many churches are in this town. But there are other Protestants out there that we could learn from. And if your mind is capable of thinking about this further thought, there are also Orthodox and Catholic Christians out there that we might learn something from. Maybe they're doing something in their music that we could use. Maybe they're doing something in their charitable work that we could use. You never know. We're not the only kind of Christians out there. Thirdly, we are not the only church in town. We could pause for a moment and wave across the street at our United Methodist friends. We're not the only Christians on this intersection. We share it with a gas station, a car repair window shield place, and another church. And there's a church here, and there's two churches there, and there's another two over that way. Every direction from us, just about, except for up the hill right behind us, there are more churches. We could learn from things that they're doing well, or things that they have failed at. We could look at those and learn. What does it take to learn? What does it take to learn from the experience of other people, other Christians in particular, but other people? It takes something that is difficult and sometimes in short supply. It takes humility. You need to first admit that you don't know everything and that you're not right about everything. It takes open eyes, an open heart, an open mind, plus the discernment and the wisdom to see the difference between the positive and the negative. You need to look at what other people have done, what other churches are trying, and to be able to say, this is the good stuff and this is the not good stuff. If you can't tell the difference between the two, looking at others isn't going to help you any, because it's all going to look the same. And we need another thing. We need a commitment to weigh all of that by the Word of God. Whether or not it's successful somewhere else doesn't mean it's biblical. Whether or not it's a failure somewhere else doesn't mean it's biblical. What means it's biblical if it's biblical. We need to be able to weigh all of those things. Not everybody is willing to do so. Not everybody is willing to learn from others. But Paul says, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. It works there, it'll work here. And I see an example of that in our ministry locally. One thing that in particular that stands out to me, and that is the Shepherd's Green Food Pantry that is operated out of St. John's. Number one, food pantries work elsewhere. They work all over the world, and in many situations, food pantries work. And so we can look at that experience and say, well, that it'll probably work here. It is an ecumenical effort. There are all sorts of churches that contribute to that food pantry, both resources and volunteers. So it's us together. That's a good thing. Collective wisdom. Thirdly, it's a very efficient use of resources because they are able to get food for people that need it at bulk rates and discounted rates because they are a food pantry. So it's a better way than simply saying when someone needs food, we'll just go to the grocery store and grab some stuff right then. We do that for an emergency, but long term to help lots of people, it's efficient. And fourthly, it's impactful. It helps real people in our community. So we can look at something like that, weigh it, consider it, and say, yes, this is what we want to support. And we can do that about all sorts of ministries when we see what other churches are doing. The next thought, on the first day of every week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income, saving it up so that when I come, no collections will have to be made. So the second thought is, when making plans, consider what resources we have to work with and proceed accordingly. Paul knew that the Christian community in Corinth wasn't rich. They didn't have a lot of resources. We don't know a lot of details about them, but they didn't have money to spare. And he knew that if he came to them out of the blue and simply said, let's take up a collection for the Christians in Judea that are starving, they wouldn't have had anything on hand. And so considering the resources that they had, he said it would be better for you if you set aside a little bit here and a little bit there, because your brothers and sisters in Christ in Judea are starving, and everything you can give will be helpful. So that reminds us of a very important question. How can we make a difference with what we have? With the amount of money that we have, with the building that we have, with the people that we have, how do we make a difference with what we have? Because we can't make a difference with what we don't have because we don't have it, right? You get that. We can't make a plan that takes 1,000 volunteers because we don't have them. Maybe if we got a whole bunch of churches together, we would, but work with what we have and see what we have. Well, the first thing that we can do to make what we have effective is to dedicate it to the work of the Lord. When Jesus fed the 5,000, the first thing he did was ask, who's got food? And they found the kid with a few pieces of fish and a few loaves of bread, and they said, we got this. And he said, I can work with that. What we never give to the Lord's work is never going to be used for the Lord's work. So give what we have, work with what we have, dedicate it to the Lord. The second thing that Paul teaches us here is make it a regular habit. Make it something ongoing, something consistent. He says every week, every time you have income, every time you have resources, consider how you can put them aside. Consider what you can use. Consider where you can use it. So we need to make it habitual. And thirdly, the example that we see here from the Apostle Paul is to focus on crucial needs, especially life-saving and life-sustaining efforts. When there is a famine, when there is a hurricane, when there is a civil war, when there is problems, when there are problems that are costing people their lives, that's job one. Because if people are not alive, then we can't minister to them in the future. Notice in this, Paul does not tell them how much to give. He knew that every household had varying incomes and responsibilities. Some households had a small income and a lot of people they were responsible for. Some households had a larger income and less responsibilities. So Paul didn't say, each of you put aside this amount of money. Paul didn't even say, each of you put aside this percentage of money. He simply said, do it in keeping with your income. Each family needs to consider their own situation. You need to consider, what funds do we have? What time do we have? What physical abilities do we have? You need to think about where you are. As the song goes, count your blessings. Figure out, what do I have? Do I have physical ability? Can I walk? Can I lift? Do I have skills? What can I do? What can I dedicate to the work of the Lord? And once you know what you have, once you have made an assessment of what is available, then you can properly respond to calls and appeals for help. Now, we as a church have, of course, regular ministry expenses that need to be supported. We know that. That happens every week. We take up a collection every week for the regular things. And we also have a few times each year special denominational collections, like One Great Hour of Sharing. We do these once a year for a couple of weeks each time, and we send it on to ABCOPAD and ABC USA to support those ministries. In addition, there are, of course, local charities like the Food Pantry, or ABC Life Center, or Emmaus Haven, or Mustard Seed Mission, or the Salvation Army, or on and on. There's a bunch of those. And then there are international and Christian charities as well that do amazing work, like the Gideons, or Wycliffe, or I could go on and on. that deal with poverty and the gospel and all sorts of things. So there are more than enough worthy causes. There is absolutely no lack of worthy Christian causes that could use your funds or your time or your talent or your prayers or whatever you have to give, in whichever amount you have to give it. What Paul is saying to you this morning is have a plan as a family about how you are going to help. Figure out together, based on your resources, how much time you can volunteer, how many resources you can give, what things you're going to pray for, and how much. Because this is something that fascinates me. The Lord puts on people's hearts certain ministries, certain ideas, certain causes. Sometimes it has to do with where they've been in life. A woman will volunteer at ABC Life Center because she had an unplanned pregnancy. And it makes perfect sense that that's why she's volunteering down there, because they helped her or someone like them helped her when she was in a tough spot. And sometimes people have that same ministry on their heart for no such connection. It just does. So whatever that thing is that has your passion in the Lord, figure that out and dedicate to it what you can. That is all Paul is saying to us. Make a plan, do your best, and do it. God is not asking you to give what you do not have. God is not asking you to volunteer everywhere. That is not the way this works. This is also, FYI, an excellent opportunity for teaching children, and something we will do with Clara when she's old enough to understand it a little bit better, is to have children volunteer, to have children give something of their income, whether they have an allowance or they get gifts from grandma or whatever it is, and set some of that aside for certain causes, so that they see that this is something that we care about. Because as they're growing up, they will not understand necessarily that check that you send, because they're not involved in that conversation unless you open up your checkbook and explain that to your children, which, that's a way to go too. You got to learn about budgeting sometime, but when they're really little, that's probably not helping them any. So Paul is telling us this morning, think through what you have, come up with a plan so that you're ready when the opportunity presents itself. Paul says in verse 3, "Then when I arrive, I will give letters of introduction to the men you approve and send them with your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable for me to go also, they will accompany me." Now, this is the encouraging part. Paul says, when you're making plans, consider what success would look like and how you can build upon it. Paul says there will be a collection. I know there's going to be something, and 2 guys or 3 or more are going to go with me to Jerusalem to present it. You see, Paul's plan wasn't just about famine relief. It was also about building relationships between the Jewish and Gentile Christians, bridging that cultural and geographic divide that lay between them, and it was a serious one. They came from very different backgrounds, and Paul is a smart man. He says, I can do 2 things at once. I can do the very important, very short-term, acute famine relief. This has to happen soon because people will starve if we don't. And I can build up brotherhood and relationships because we have a structural need in the church for the Jewish Christians and the Gentile Christians to know each other and consider each other brothers and sisters in Christ. And so if I send these Gentiles to Jerusalem, they can be ambassadors, they can learn more about Judaism, and they can help in the future. We absolutely have this exact same kind of thing playing out in our country right now. We have a specific issue that is very acute and very front and center right now, and of course that is the death of George Floyd and the issues in the Minneapolis Police Department. A very targeted, very small, very short-term thing. But we also have a larger issue that goes back decades and centuries, really, about racism and about race relations and about law enforcement and all of those issues. And so while some are focusing on here, some are broadening it out. And that's okay, that's normal to look short-term and long-term, specific and general. That's okay, that's part of Christian ministry. So as a church, we have an obligation to today's problems locally. We have an obligation to do what we can about the problems that are here right now in Venango County. And if you don't know that there are some problems, we'll give you a chance. I'll tell them to you. I am acutely aware of some of them because we deal with them. We have an opioid issue. We have other drug abuse issues. We have issues of joblessness. We have issues of a variety of sorts. We have an aging population that is straining resources. We have a lot of things that we can be a part of here now. But we also have tomorrow's needs to consider. As much as we can foresee them, you can't always see what's coming, but when you see them coming, you have to plan for the future too. And we have needs in the rest of Pennsylvania, needs in the rest of the United States, needs around the world, all of which, as a local church, as a denomination, as a church in the world today, are our concern. This is one of the reasons why, as a church, we have a separate missions budget. If you're not aware of that, we have a general budget and a missions budget. The missions budget is dedicated towards those local Christian charities and international missions efforts. We purposefully set aside a piece of our budget every year to make sure that we are supporting those issues. Let me add this from a personal standpoint. Given all of this, what are my responsibilities? What are my concerns as the minister of this local congregation? I have all of these things in mind. The mess that my desk is reflects that I'm thinking about all of these different things at the same time. And Cheryl smiled at that because she knows it's a disaster. Every time I clean it a week later, it's the same. Because I have concern for each person that is here today. And normally here today would be more of us, but you know what I mean. The people that are part of this church right now. The members, the attenders, the regulars, the irregulars, all of them are my concern. But I also have concern for the young people that we're training up for tomorrow. Our youth. In junior church, in our teens, the future. I have concern for the people that we don't know yet who are going to be here in the future, making sure that our church is a welcoming place for new people, making sure that our church is available for new people. And I'm encouraged by the fact that of the people here this morning, you weren't here a certain number of years ago. We have a good amount of relatively new faces. That means that we're doing something okay there, but there are still more people. And we want more people from the outside coming in. And so I have concern for them about our outreach, our evangelism, the way that we conduct ourselves. I can't just think about the people we have now. But there's more. I have concern about the brotherhood of the Christian church here in Franklin, about all of our churches in this area, that we're all doing okay, that we're all working together, and not just Franklin, but Venango County as a whole. And not just Franklin and Venango County, but all of ABCOPAD's churches, the 300 churches in American Baptist Churches of Pennsylvania and Delaware. I'm involved in the Franklin Ministerium. I'm involved in the Venango County Ministerium. I'm involved in the French Creek Association Ministerium. I'm involved in the Venango County Regional Board, or the ABCOPAD Regional Board of Governors. All of these pieces, because they all matter. And for a minister, it's a balancing act. I have to devote sufficient time and energy and resources to all of those. To the people here now, to the people that are growing up in this church, to the people that will be here in the future. and to all of those ecumenical and Christian organizations. That's the way it is when you are a church. You have all of these concerns. Sometimes we do well in one area and not so well in another, but they're all important to us. Paul says, after I go through Macedonia, I'll come to you, for I'll be going through Macedonia. When you're making your plans for the future, be as specific as you can be. Paul said, yeah, I'm going that way, soon. At some point, a church just needs to choose, just needs to pick a ministry, focus on a particular effort, marshal the resources that you think you'll need to accomplish it, and just go for it. At some point, you just need to try. You just need to do it. As the poet said, better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. At some point in ministry, you just need to try. You look and see what other churches are doing, you get advice, you look at your resources and you say, I think we can do this, and you just try. And maybe it'll work, and maybe it won't. But at some point, you just need to try and say, this is our plan. It's as specific as we can make it. We think that's the future. Paul says, perhaps I'll stay with you for a while, or even spend the winter, so that you can help me on my journey wherever I go. You also need flexibility when looking at the future. You can't lock yourself in and say, this is exactly what we're going to do and the way we're going to do it. Because if a ministry effort is going well, maybe you should extend it. Maybe you should expand it. Because when it's working, that's something you want to build on. But if a ministry effort is going poorly, maybe you need to pull the plug. Maybe you need to pull back and put those resources somewhere else. These decisions take the wisdom of experience. They take prayer. They take, as the proverb that we started with this morning says, they take the wisdom of many people. Because the answers aren't always cut and dry. Paul says, for I don't want to see you now and make only a passing visit. I hope to spend some time with you, if the Lord permits. And then, of course, where we end up as this brings to a close. When making plans, remember the Lord is the arbiter of the future. Life doesn't always go according to our plans. Anybody have a life that went exactly according to your plans? Let me in on how you made that happen, because that's not the way life works. Life throws us curveballs. It gives us lemons, as they say. We have plans that get messed up, and that's the way it is for the church. We can think we know what's going to happen. We can put the resources, and sometimes it just doesn't work, or it turns out different than what we expected. You see, in the end, as followers of Jesus Christ, we are accountable for what we can control, not what we cannot control. We are responsible for our intentions. We are responsible for our efforts, for our prayers, for our dedication. What the future holds remains squarely, safely in the hands of God. It's not our responsibility. Plan, do your best, and God is in control. An example from our church in recent history will illustrate this. About 7-8 years ago, our Awana program, our youth program on Sunday nights, had about 35 kids and about 12, sometimes more, volunteers. If you had come to me that day and said, where will Awana be in 5 years? I would have been very positive about its future. I would have been encouraged because we had a great program running. 3 years ago, we shut it down because there were 3 to 5 kids each week and only 4 or 5 volunteers. It evaporated. Things changed. Some of our kids aged out. They got too old for the program, and we didn't have ones to replace them. Some of the ones from the church. Some of the community kids that we were getting, we didn't get anymore. Some of the volunteers that we had got moved away. Actually, a couple families of our regular volunteers moved away. We didn't know that was going to happen. Both for jobs. Some of our volunteers got to the point where they said, yeah, I'm not young enough to chase these kids around anymore. They had tremendous dedication, but you have to go with the times. And so we changed, and we're trying different things now. And that's the way it always is. It would have been foolish for us to close that program when it was doing well. And it would have been foolish for us to continue to beat a dead horse, as they say. When it was done, it was done. And I appreciate that this congregation saw the wisdom in that. And we will continue to look in the future for opportunities to try new things. And if something we're doing isn't working, we'll modify it. Lastly, Paul says, I will stay on at Ephesus until Pentecost, because a great door for effective work is open for me, and there are many who oppose me. This is fascinating. In light of what 2020 has been, is our glass half full or half empty? The past 6 months have really been hard on optimists. If you are an optimist who always sees that good things are around the corner, you feel exhausted right now, do you not? If you are a pessimist who's always looking for the next bad thing, you feel so vindicated. Because it has been a hard few months. It is hard to see opportunities when you're in the middle of anxiety and when people are miserable. But Paul saw one. And despite the fact that he knew that many people were opposing him, he saw an opportunity. There would be people that tried to stop him, but he said, I see something. The gospel has an opportunity in Ephesus. If we look at Acts chapter 19, when Paul was in Ephesus, that time in Ephesus was cut short by a riot. Literally, a riot in the streets from the people that opposed him. They were idol makers. Their business was making idols and selling them at the temple of Ephesus. And Paul was ruining their business by teaching people that there is only one true God and that idols are worthless. And so they stirred up the people and started a riot, and they wanted to kill him. So no, it was not smooth sailing for Paul. But his time in Ephesus was absolutely important and useful because he was able to build up a body of believers there that when he came sorely needed his leadership. He worked with them, he trained them, he got them on solid footing in that short period of time he had. And then when the riot happened, they let him out, he got out of the city so he could go on to new opportunities. So what will the next few days, weeks, months, years be for us as a church? We don't know. We plan, we seek wisdom, we try. Maybe we'll continue doing what we're doing now. Maybe, and what we're doing now changed from a couple of months ago, right? We're doing some stuff now that we've never done before. There's a camera right in front of my face putting us on Facebook Live. We would have never done that had it not been for COVID-19. So there are people that are now a part of our ministry because they watch on that don't live here. Now I've got new people there to concern myself with too, but that's okay. It's an opportunity. If our hearts and our minds are open to what the Word of God is telling us, if our hearts and our minds are open to what the Spirit of God is saying to us, and if we are currently engaged in the work of the Lord, if we are working for the gospel and for the work of Christ's church as best we can with what we have and the way that we can do it, then whatever happens next, whatever comes next, we're going to be fine. Because we're standing on solid ground right now. Assuming what comes next is not Godzilla. I don't make any exceptions for that. That is not cool. If the next thing is Godzilla, forget it. We're going to plan B. But anything short of that, we'll be fine. We'll keep forging ahead. Applications. Number one, as a church, we need to plan for the future, absolutely. We need to consider where we are and where we're going. We need to plan for the future. Secondly, our plans must include a commitment to the work of the Lord. That should be obvious when we're talking about the church's plans, but it needs to be said that the Lord's work is what we're about. And thirdly, in the end, God is the one in control of the future. just as he is the one in control of the present.